Larry, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Really delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
I am very excited to be here and be able to share. We've got some common background with JT and Scribe, so I'm excited to overlap some.
Yeah, brilliant. And what a leader he is. Javon, we interviewed him for the very first series, and we were both chatting off air about Javon's background and the wonderful job he's done with Scribe. So we've both been through that journey. And speaking of your wonderful book, there's lots of alignment between what you have enshrined, certainly within the 6 pillars of performance and your entire book, and what we have enshrined within our ScaleX 10 principle framework. So I'm excited to get into a lot of that today. I open up with this question to all of our guests, Larry. Our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So what does scaling mean to you, Larry?
Scaling
with purpose.
With purpose. Okay, so we're going to add both of those. To me, purpose is that which drives a specific end. So purpose is the energy behind any movement. And I believe that the strongest purposes come from internal. External purposes, drive from the external world will lead to accomplishment, but very rarely fulfillment. And so when you are able to grow or direct your business or your life with purpose that comes from inside, ultimately you can really receive the full fulfillment from the experience. And so scaling, for me, scaling with purpose would be growing the organization where you're not required, you're not necessary, in a way that produces not only fulfillment, but massive impact in the world.
Yeah, I love that. And speaking of massive impact on the world, we mentioned at the outset your wonderful book, How Leadership Actually Works, a Navy SEAL's complete system for coordinating teams. So I'm always curious when I have authors on the show to understand what has inspired them to write the book. So that question to you, what inspired you to write the book, Larry?
So my background is as an officer in the SEAL teams, running combat operations for almost just over a decade. And with that background, SEAL books generally come in 2 flavors, especially in the leadership or the performance realm. One of the most common flavors of SEAL books is what I require or consider entertainment, right? So it's a series of stories designed to inspire, to inform, to provide some direction. The second type are books where they're taking principles from the SEALs and presenting them to you to figure out how to apply them in your life or business. My inspiration for this book was really to write neither one of those. Mine was to be able I spent more time as an entrepreneur than I did as a SEAL before writing the book. So it was really about understanding the principles of high performance in the business world and using that as a contrast to what I saw as the principles of high performance in the SEALs. And it was in that gap between what's done in the business world and what's done in the special operator world that I found the real value. And that's what I wanted to share in that book.
Brilliant. We've actually had quite a number of guests from the services. We've had USS Naval commanders, lead FBI investigators. Chris Voss was actually on the show last week. We've had ex-Marines on the show. First time we've had a Navy SEAL. So what do you think business can learn from the training that you guys actually undergo within the SEALs? We'll get into this, the kind of the 6 pillars later on, but just broadly, what do you think we can learn from the SEALs in the business world?
I think the better question is what is understood or taken for granted in the SEALs that isn't understood or used in the civilian world. To me, that, because there's all sorts of lessons around perseverance and self-regulation and courage. Those are all good lessons. But being able to see that the mindset of an entrepreneur and the mindset of a SEAL, there's something missing there. There's three things that I've found are missing. And whenever we work with companies, these are always kind of the first three things we have to deal with. The first one is holding responsibility. In the SEALs, if a SEAL tells me they're going to do something, they make a commitment to meet a standard of performance, they hold that responsibility 100% of the time. I never have to question it. In the civilian world, in the business world, if someone does 80% of what they say they're going to do, half the time, they're a high performer. Just this air of being able to make commitments but not hold them is very common in organizations, and I believe it's the foundation of most of the problems. That's the first one. The second one is around feedback. As a SEAL, if I'm not able to receive feedback and implement it immediately with no cost, no emotional cost or mental cost, I'm going to put myself and the team at risk. And so in the SEAL community, the ability to make a commitment to hold the responsibility and then immediately receive feedback on how to do it better and implement that feedback is like breathing. In the civilian world, if you give someone feedback half the time, they start crying, which I remember the first time I brought one of my civilian team members in and they had said they were going to do something. I just asked, hey, you said you're going to do this. You didn't do it. I was just wondering why you didn't do it. And they started crying. And my head exploded. I'm not yelling at you. There's nothing, no one's shooting at us. I'm just asking why you didn't do something. And they were crying. So that ability to receive feedback. And the third one is planning. In the SEALs, we never fail to plan, but we always plan to fail. And we plan to do anything we're doing. We put a plan together, even if it's a very, very short planning session. In the civilian world, I see companies plan once or twice a year and that's it. And then they rely on the individual expertise of the manager to be able to put together actions in the middle of it. And if we did that as a special operator, we wouldn't survive very long. So those three things: responsibility, feedback, and planning.
Yeah, I love those. And planning is the fourth principle of our 10 principles Scale X framework. We'll get into that a little bit as the show develops. I'm really curious, how do you seed that level of responsibility? Is that solely down to the fact that, well, if I don't do my job, somebody might get killed today? So the motivation is so strong for the person to be accountable, to be responsible? Or is it more than that in terms of the lessons that see that 100% and the training that sees that 100% responsibility in the SEALs, and how we can bring that into the business world? Because this is certainly something that is true of those companies who scale successfully. They have a leadership team who take responsibility.
What I've found, and this is one of the common misconceptions when someone reads the book or when we're working with an organization, is they believe that the content in the book or what we bring into the organizations was taught to me as a SEAL. And that wasn't the case. If my, let's call it, my superiors had to explain to me how to hold responsibility, I just would have been fired, right? Like I wouldn't have been allowed to be a SEAL. It was just taken for granted that if you said you were going to do something, you're going to do it. So it actually took working with hundreds of organizations to identify a framework for holding responsibility that was just, like I said, taken for granted as a SEAL. And what I found is that there are 4 parts to responsibility, and we do a very bad job in passing those responsibilities effectively. One of the pieces to it is if you're surrounded by people that don't hold responsibility well, you're the cause of that, right? You're the one that is enabling these individuals that don't have intent to harm you or harm the organization to make choices that result in irresponsibility. And that usually comes from missing one of these four pieces. The first piece is awareness of the consequence of not holding the responsibility and awareness of the purpose of the responsibility. The second piece is going to be standard of performance, and that standard of performance has to be complete and it has to be understood by the listener, not just stated by the speaker. And you have the power to act. So if I have an awareness of the purpose and the consequence of not holding a responsibility, I understand the standard of performance, I have to be able to institute enough change around me to meet that standard of performance. And so if I'm handing responsibility to you, it's on me to make sure that you have that power in the form of knowledge, skills, responsibility, authority, resources to meet the standard of performance that you understand and hold in order to fulfill the purpose and avoid the consequence. So those three become the foundation of passing or holding a responsibility. And then the fourth piece is getting a commitment. Very often we toss responsibilities on those around us, never actually getting their commitment to using their power to fulfill their standard of performance and take care of the purpose and avoid the consequence. And so that four piece, every irresponsible action around you is missing one of those four things. And that is on the person passing the responsibility, not receiving it, right? So if I don't pass those four things to you, then it is not possible for you to hold the responsibility. And part of it is someone receiving it is I will not commit to doing something unless I have those first three very clear in my mind. And so one of the biggest things that we espouse in our company, as well as in the companies around us, is saying no. No, I can't hold that responsibility. The formula we use is no, why, and how. So no, I can't do it. This is why I can't do it. And this is how I could say yes to it or commit to doing it. But if you have an organization that doesn't allow no, then you're going to have a responsibility that is breeding irresponsibility in the organization.
And of course, that level of transparency and that level of candor would require a very, very strong culture, and a culture which perpetuates that. Is that, how much of your experience now working in the business world is really about working on the culture to allow this to happen in the first place?
One of my, I'd say, superpowers is language, and being very, very precise with my language, and not only precise, but concise, in that, like when we started, the first question you asked around what does scaling with purpose mean? The first thing I did was define what purpose is to me. So I took purpose and defined it in a couple words. Purpose is that which drives a specific end. By doing that, we now have a shared background experience, which enables us to coordinate action effectively. And so when I go to answer your question around culture, culture can mean anything, right? If you were to ask 10 people, what is culture? You're going to get 10 different answers. So I'll answer your question from my perspective of culture. And for me, culture are groups of observable actions, and that's it, right? So at the most fundamental level, the culture of an individual are the groups of actions that I can predict in the individual, otherwise known as personality or character. So culture in an organization, you have to get a little more refined. What types of behaviors do you need in an organization that enable responsibility to be held? Right? That's that question. Okay, that makes sense. The core behaviors that we bring up, which I think is one of the biggest distinctions between leadership, the understanding of leadership in the SEALs and the understanding of leadership in the civilian world, is that leadership is expected at every level of the organization. and we build behaviors that support that, otherwise known as culture, right? A culture of leading at every level. Those behaviors should be observable. We identified two behaviors just now. One behavior would be, no one in our organization is going to accept the responsibility that's just like a drive-by one, where you just come by and say, hey, can you take care of that report? They're going to say no. What's the purpose of it? What's the consequence of not getting it done? What's my standard of performance? Why do you think I have the power to do it? And then they'll commit to it, right? So that would be a culture of leadership. That person is leading that manager by having them give them responsibility in a way they can actually hold it. That's an example of building a culture of leadership at every level. Espousing leadership from someone who has no positional authority to lead their managers in a way that enable them to have effective action.
And back to the the ability for somebody to, or the understanding for somebody to be accountable and to take responsibility. Presumably, then it is about culture. It's about, do you encourage an explicit protocol in terms of a communication protocol in terms of that framework?
It's so a new person that comes into the organization, we will make a requirement that for the first couple weeks to months of being in the organization, they aren't allowed to accept a responsibility that their manager hasn't filled out a worksheet that covers those four things. They aren't allowed to pass one unless they write it down on a worksheet that covers those four things. So we have part of what we'll institute in organizations is that understanding of those four things: awareness, standard of performance, power, and commitment. We'll have them write it down. There's little blocks like, what is the consequence? What's the purpose? What's the standard of performance? How do you assess the individual as the power to do this? And then, is there a commitment? Yes or no? So we're not relying on their understanding. We're changing their behavior. Once we change their behavior, that becomes the culture of it, because culture is just behavior, groups of behaviors.
Purpose and vision is the second principle of our ScaleX 10 principle framework. You've mentioned it quite a number of times since we opened the show. How important is it for leaders at every level to have that clear understanding of purpose?
So purpose and vision, I'd separate. So purpose versus vision, I'm going to have a different, there's different importance in my framework around purpose. So purpose is that which drives a specific end. Within teams, there's a significant importance in alignment of multiple purposes. So if purpose is that which drives a specific end, any individual, a group of individuals will have a purpose, right? It always, regardless of if it's stated or not. An individual or group of individuals will have some direction they're moving, and therefore that purpose is derived from that. So any team has a purpose. An individual on that team has a purpose. And that individual has an individual purpose, something that drives them forward. If you as a manager don't align the purpose of the team with the purpose of the role, a specific role in that team, with alignment of the purpose of the individual, you're going to have problems. And so think of it from the concept of layered purposes. You got purpose of the company, purpose of the team or department in the company, purpose of a specific role on that team. Each one of those should be defined and aligned. And then the individual who's holding that role will have a purpose, something that drives them forward. One of my primary jobs as a manager is to make sure that their individual drive, their individual purpose is aligned with the purpose of their role, and ensuring their role is aligned with the purpose of the team, and ensure that that team or department's purpose is aligned with the overall organization. So it's not only about identifying a purpose, it's a purpose at each level of the organization and alignment between them.
Yeah, I love that. And we we group purpose and vision in the one principle because they're hand in glove. Purposes for us is why you're doing what you're doing. I stated at the outset, our own purpose and our vision, how I articulate vision is the fullest expression, the fullest manifestation of your purpose at the point in which you've crafted that vision. It's I think what you've referred to in your book is a desired end state, is where you want to go. So, share with us just your thoughts around vision aligned with purpose, Larry.
I love the way that you stated it, right? Purpose is the energy behind what you're going to produce. Vision is what you're going to produce, is how I heard you describe it.
Yeah, perfect.
For us, one of our driving in this conversation, our driving pieces, as you described, the desired end state. For us, the desired end state, we identified through decades of working with human behavior that humans' behavior is most effectively driven by production of certain emotional states and avoidance of other emotional states. So a human's why is most powerful when it talks about what they're going to feel and what they're going to avoid feeling. And to us, that's what a desired end state is. It's a description from a specific perspective of the emotional state that I want to experience and the emotional state I want to avoid. Why we use desired end states as the foundation of purpose, drive, and vision is because it doesn't change. Very rarely does someone's desired emotional state change, whereas the strategies and tactics necessary to achieve it will change on a regular basis. And that's where, as you said, the reason why we're doing something is on our side. You're saying vision, ours is desired end state. It's the future that we want to create, specifically in how we want to feel. The strategies necessary to do that are what we're going to do, and how we're going to do it are the specific tactics necessary to execute on the strategies. And so that's how we break it down.
Yeah, we're very much aligned on that. Something that you've referenced there is in terms of driving people, motivating people to actually execute towards the vision, is connecting them to a future emotional state to get a sense of feeling of what that's going to be like in the future when they achieve this. How can we go about doing that? We take our own the participants in our program through a certain process, which is about, but I'd be really keen to hear from you how you go about really getting leaders to emotionally connect to that desired end state.
I call it the waterfall of obligation. So as a human being, we have an infinite number of concerns that we can choose. I can be worried about an infinite number of things. As a human, I can create multiple obligations from one very simple thing. The example that I use is eating. So if I have the concern to stay alive as a human, that requires the obligation to eat, right? So the concern comes first. If I don't have the concern of staying alive, then I don't have the obligation to eat. As soon as I have a concern, there's now that concern focuses the set of obligations I can choose from. Because I could, if I don't have the concern to live, then I don't have the obligation to eat. I could have the obligation to go for a walk, right? The different obligations show up. So my concerns narrow my obligations. As soon as I have an obligation, that obligation becomes an obligation when there's a consequence, a threat that arises if I do not hold my obligation, and a benefit if I do, right? So it's a threat or an opportunity. something is not an obligation if there is no threat for not holding it and no opportunity for holding it. And so as soon as I have the concern to live, I have the obligation to eat. Now that obligation to eat as a human, I can make it even more specific. So now I have the concern about being healthy. So I have the obligation to eat, I have the obligation to eat healthy. Well, then I bring in the concern for all the animals in the world. Well, now I have the obligation to eat vegetables only. Then I have the concern around the planet. So now I have the obligation to eat raw vegetables. So as a human, we are little obligation creation machines, right? Just the concern of I want to stay alive now turned into 5 obligations, all the way to being a raw vegan when it comes to eating. Those concerns and obligations help us to direct people, right? When I can understand their concerns or shape, move, shift their concerns, their perceived obligations change. And then from their obligations, making sure that they live in the presence of the threat and the desire for the opportunity, I create ambition to hold that obligation, which will take care of the concern, which directs the action of the individual.
I love that. I've never heard that articulated like that before. That's so. What I've often found is that the communication and articulation around the purpose and the vision, the purpose and the desired end state,
right,
is very healthy at the, let's say, to use the business term, the strategic leadership team level. But as you, to use your concept, you know, as you go down through the organization, that waterfall of obligation seems to be diluted in lots of organizations. Yeah, absolutely. What do you encourage within the businesses that you work with, Larry, to ensure that that's as strong, you know, right across the organization, regardless of where any team is situated or any function that they uphold within the organization?
You can look at it from the thought of, if any time that I need a human to make a specific choice, which results in a specific behavior, which is over and over again, right, in organizations. I mean, that's all the time, is I need humans to make specific choices so that they produce specific behaviors that result in specific results. So anytime that I have that need to produce a specific behavior, having a desired end state gives me control over it. So most companies have a vision at the top, but they don't have a vision for why do I need to fill out the report. Right? They don't have a desired end state for that. We'll create desired end states that have to nest. You know those Russian dolls that all stack inside of each other?
Yeah.
Each one of them looks different, right? They all look different. They're all shaped the same. They nest together. Desired end states are the same. Purposes are the same. Visions need to be the same, where at every point that I need to direct a human's behavior or influence a human's behavior, I need a desired end state. It has to be the same shape, even though it's a different color. It's painted differently. They have to fit together. So how specific I will get with this is, say I'm producing a presentation, and in that presentation, my desire is to do more than just entertain, it's to educate. And the difference between entertainment and education is behavior change. So if I want to educate someone, if I want to change their behavior, then I'm going to, every slide of my presentation, I'll take time to write a desired end state for that slide. So what do I want the human to be feeling? What do I want to have in their mind around what they don't want to feel on that slide? And then I go to the next one. Every project that we do, the manager of that project is required to write a desired end state for the team and for management. So desired end states, visions, purposes, where companies fall short is they do it once on a big thing, and then they're surprised when the janitor doesn't understand what his desired end state is, and why the purpose or vision from the top level that's on the wall when he walks in means nothing to the janitor, because we need to speak purpose, vision, desired end state from his perspective and his level, not just the perspective of the company.
Well, let's get into that and explore that a little bit further. How do we, and what do you guys do specifically to mitigate the challenge of this leader follower trait within so many organizations, and cultivate leaders right across the organization?
The first thing is, I go back to something that is going to get repetitive, is language. So if I go into an organization and I take 5 people at different positions in the organization, and I ask them to tell me in one sentence, what is a manager, what is a leader, what is a follower, and ask them to list 1 or 2 required behaviors of a manager, a leader, and a follower, I'll get 5 different answers. So no wonder we have trouble coordinating action as managers, leaders, and followers when 2 people will hold opposite distinctions for manager, right? One will believe that a manager's job is to be able to just do all the little paperwork bits and pieces, while the leader's job is to create the vision and the drive and the inspiration. And another person will believe that the manager's job is to give me the specific direction of what I need to do and give me space to do it, while another person believes that a job of a manager is to just stay out of my way and let me take care of all the action. In those 3 examples, in what we would make distinct for lead, manage, and follower, you have a different understanding of a manager from the perspective of being a follower, being a leader, being a manager. And so in order to coordinate action and to bring leadership to every level of the organization, you have to first make distinct manager, leader, and follower. And you have to have everyone in the organization hold that same distinction for each of those and same expectation of behavior.
What do you find is the most common challenge, and when you overcome it, it gives organizations the greatest leverage to achieve high performance and scale?
I don't know if you'll like this answer. So I've found from working with, at this point, we're talking 200-300 organizations. There are revenue plateaus that every organization will hit, and the revenue plateaus will be the same regardless of the structure, the product, which blows me away. That you can take a high-tech company that has 20 people in it, and they will hit the exact same revenue plateaus as a 2,000 person grocery distribution company. It doesn't matter. There are milestones of revenue that every company hits. The first one is $1 million, and I'll go in the US, right, for dollars. Yeah. I don't know how this translates to pounds. So $1 million is the first one. 3 to 5 is the next. 8 to 12 is the next. 25 to 30 is the next. From there, 50 to 100, like that's where it varies a bit, right? But it's going to be somewhere in that kind of about 100 mark. 250, 500, 1 billion. Those sit no matter what. Those revenue plateaus, the ability to, as you would say, scale, right? To transcend that plateau. As soon as you transcend that plateau, as soon as I cross 8 to 12, I'm going to get to 25 to 30 easy, right? That's what we look at as scale, right? Then I'm going to get stuck at 25 to 30 until I transcend that. When I transcend that, I'm going to be at 100 before you know it. These plateaus. So this is where we get to the real answer of it. How do I get past those plateaus? Every one of those plateaus is caused by a paradigm shift in how to manage my people. So it is 100% a management paradigm or philosophy that drives the growth and then limits the growth until there's a complete shift in understanding. So why you might not like this answer is I could tell you at each one of those what it is, but it's a different philosophical shift in how to manage people at each one of those plateaus.
Well, it's really interesting. We took a business from $5 million in revenue and about 15 people to over $150 million.
Yeah.
And you call them revenue plateaus, I call them inflection points. And I'm smiling when you're calling them out.
You've been smiling, I've been excited.
And I was like, this is so insightful from a guy whose background was in the military and not within business. I can relate to every one of those inflection points. And I think of the real challenge we had around 8 to 12, and especially as the team gets, beyond even 50 people, then it becomes just more complex. Politics start to creep in. But take the 25 to $30 million mark. We came from a business that was planning probably for events 6 months ahead, preparing to commit cash, let's say, to investments 6 months ahead.
Yep.
By the time you're a 25 to $30 million company, you cannot, given your vision to take that then presumably, invariably to, let's say, $100 million, which we did, you have to invest now 3 years in advance of to provide for the infrastructure and the people, the capability, the competence for what's required at that $100 million.
I'm interested when you guys broke 8 to 12 and then hit 25 to 30, and then you broke 25, 30, 100. I'd be interested to see what was the shift in let's call it kind of overall management of people that had to happen at those pieces. I'm interested to see what you say.
Well, I'll come back to the paradigm first of all, because our paradigm was very much about conservation of cash and being really cautious about in spending cash. So it was, let's say, quite frugal in the early stages, and we bootstrapped everything. We didn't go for external investment. And so that paradigm, that collection of kind of beliefs and behaviors and habits was ingrained. But by the time we get to 25 and 30, we went from, exactly. I remember investing, $15,000 on an ERP system. By the time that took me about 8 weeks to install, by the time I was leaving, we had just installed an ERP system that cost $3 million and took 2 years. Now, if we hadn't made the decision 2 years out to invest in that ERP system, we would not have been able to scale. The question then, if we use the ERP as an example around the change in how we led people in the early stages, we were very much, here's where we're going, you better hurry up and catch up. As we grew, the vision was, and I spent, when we were setting out the 2020 vision, I spent 1 year inviting every single person in the business to monthly workshops so that they could put their paint stroke on the vision canvas and invite their view of what they wanted the future to be like in the future, their future, and was that aligned to where the company was going. So it was much more, creating the vision was much more collective, and the decision around the ERP system was actually delegated to the teams within the business rather than being imposed by the board and kind of us coming out of the boardroom going, right.
Yeah, so that's it, right? I'll put it into words and you tell me if I'm correct or not. To get past 8 to 12 million, all of a sudden you need a process and structure that's managed by a specific person. Right, from under 8 to 12, you don't necessarily need the process and structure. for that's to be managed by someone, right? It's just someone does it, right? To get past 3 to 5 million, you actually have to have process and structure, right? Where the individual is doing it. After 8 to 12, someone has to manage the process and structure. So you got one person's name, his, his or her job is to manage this process. That gets you to 25. At 25, what I see in every company is there's about, let's say, 5 to 10 people, a whole set of processes and structures. But if that one person leaves, we're in trouble. Like if Bob's gone, we're in trouble. To pass 25 to 30, Bob, you need a Bob, but you don't care if it's actually Bob or Sally, right?
Absolutely.
The actual position of manager for running the process is now a process, right? That position is not dependent on the individual. And that's what you were saying, right? You went from under 25 to 30, someone made a decision on the pay system. After that, it was like, now all of a sudden it didn't matter. The individual manager didn't make the decision. It was made through process and structure. And that's what enabled you to 100.
Completely agree. And we reference the lucky lottery winners in our book in terms of actually ensuring that as you're scaling, you mitigate single person dependency. The person who walks in one day and says, guys, sorry, I won the lottery at the weekend, I'm leaving. And you go, no, but Bob, you know everything there is to know about this particular process, and what are we going to do without you? In order to scale the business, you've got to move away from that single person dependency, which brings its own challenges in terms of communicating that to people, because also what we found within the business, knowledge is power for lots of people. Yep. And how do you encourage the communication around the implementation of processes to give people comfort that actually they're still going to be part of this organization if they disclose all the information that they know around this particular process?
It's two concepts come up there. One is relevancy. So my job as the CEO is to be irrelevant to the company. My job as a father is to be irrelevant to my boys' lives. When I'm irrelevant to their life, we can actually have a pure relationship. They're at this point, they're 8 and 5. I'm very relevant in their life, right? They can't eat, they don't have clothes, they don't have a place to live. My job is to continue to pull the relevant, anything that is relevant to me, to them, any of the need they need for me, I'm continuing to take that away to where they will not need me for anything. Therefore, I'm irrelevant in their life and I can have a pure connection and relationship with them. That's my job. As a CEO, it's my job. My job is to be irrelevant, to have the company not need me for anything. At that point, we can scale infinitely. Understanding that in my irrelevancy, I am free to really fulfill my purpose. Teaching that to individuals to that through their irrelevancy, they have freedom of full expression of their role and their purpose. That's where they get motivated.
Yeah, you've hit on something I've never heard it being described as irrelevancy, seeking that irrelevancy. That word actually can throw up anxiety for people who hold
That's why I use it. That's why I use it. It's like, that's why I love the conversation about being a parent, because when you ask someone, is it important for you to be relevant or irrelevant in your children's lives? Everyone goes to relevant, right? Because in relevancy, I have control and I can keep them safe. But that's a trap, right? That's a trap to where you actually hamper or inhibit their development and their ability to be coherent, individual, safe members of society, right? In order for them to fully express that, they can't need you at all. You need no control over what they do or don't do, because they're self-sufficient. And it really hits people hard, because we've, I think, been conditioned to believe that being important is the goal. The goal is to make it so that I'm not important at all. If I'm not important at all, I've produced real value in an organization, and in that value, I will be given bigger and bigger responsibilities. My job is to always produce irrelevancy in every responsibility I've been given, which does nothing but produce value in the organization. And I become more and more value as I bring more and more personal irrelevancy to bigger and bigger responsibilities.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, in our own language, we talked about striving to make yourself redundant in the role that you were in, which created capacity for the people that you were leading to step or managing to step into that role then, and for you to go on and, as you rightly say, take on more responsibility across the organization as it continues to scale. Just before we get into, and I'm conscious and I want to be respectful of your time, Larry. This is a brilliant conversation. I'm really enjoying it. I want to get into the 6 pillars of high performance, but before we do, before we leave the psyche of the leader, which is the first principle of our ScaleX framework, what you've described there is something that I suppose Maslow, in terms of his hierarchy of needs, would describe as maybe self-actualization, where the leader is so comfortable with themselves and their role serving the organization that they're striving to become irrelevant, to use that language is so provocative. It's, that. So what do you encourage leaders, for the leaders listening, what practically can they do to begin becoming irrelevant?
I think it's hilarious. So every time an organization is in need, right? And I use that language, right? Need could be they don't have enough money, they don't have enough clients, they don't have the right behavior, whatever the shortcoming is. Anytime an organization is in need, the immediate response is, I don't have time to learn. I don't have time to get people to do stuff. I have to do it, which means they don't have time to lead, and they don't have time to plan. Yet, any time that I am in need in an organization, that is the world telling me that I don't know something, I'm not coordinating action well enough, and I don't have a good enough strategy or plan to execute. So we kind of go the wrong direction every time, right? We get stressed, we stop learning, we stop leading, we stop planning. Remembering that any time that I am in that sense of need as an organization or an individual, that is the world telling me that I need to learn, I need to lead better, and I need to plan better. I'd say that's kind of if I was to talk about like the most practical thing you could do, is the next time you're stressed in your organization, don't stop listening to your podcast, right? Don't stop, like, jump in and do it yourself, like get it done. And don't miss sitting down with a group of individuals and taking a minute to talk about what can we do to fix this, right? I'd say it's more about not going down our old road and going down the new road of learn, lead, and plan.
Love it. Speaking of learning, leading, and planning, then can you take us through the 6 pillars of high performance which you lay out within your book?
I want to hear yours first, because you keep giving me like 1 or 2. I want to hear what all 10 are. So I'd love to list out the 10, and then
sure,
we'll trade.
Sure, the listeners of the show will be very familiar with them at this stage. So we start with psyche. Now they're all P's and the most important, there's a deliberate orientation and sequencing of these principles. So the mindset of the leader is so critically important in the first instance. So we begin with psyche, then it's purpose and vision. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why does this organization exist? And where do you want to go with it? Essentially, what do you want to achieve? Then we get into people. So once you have the right mindset, that you understand why you're doing what you're doing and where you want to go, then you're going to inspire other people to want to go there with you, and
Yep.
the right kind of people. They'll understand now why they're on this journey together.
Yep.
Then we get into planning. So we deconstruct the vision, and we take our participants through a process to take the 10 years down into 3 years, down into 1 year, down into 90 days using OKRs. Then we examine processes and systems, which is our fifth principle. Then we get into performance and setting the right metrics in place. We agree what world-class looks like in the context of this organization. Then we examine proposition. So understanding not just the features of what you do, the product or service, but actually what value does it bring? So does it solve a problem or service a need? And can you articulate that clearly? Can everyone across the organization articulate that clearly to any prospective customer?
I love that you have that. I love where that is in the position. You've set the foundation of performance before you get in there. I think people get it wrong. They're putting that at the front of the train, and it needs to be at the back. So I'm with you on that.
Again, really, your level of discernment in this, Larry, is really inspiring. We argued about this and debated about the positioning of proposition for quite some time. If we were bringing the ScaleX framework to startups, then product might be in there a lot earlier. So it's really important to get your product to market really quickly. But actually, in a scale-up organization, you've already brought your product or service to a customer set. Now it's about really teasing out the proposition. So it's a
startup is different than scale-up.
Absolutely. So now we're under the eighth principle, and this is about place. So we assert that if you have this wonderful product or service, you should bring it beyond your initial border, your existing borders, to as wide an audience as you possibly can. And that means moving either beyond your existing geography or actually to other industries, which we did.
Take more land.
Absolutely. Yeah, take more land, or actually see if it can be, if what you do can be brought into other industries.
Yeah, totally.
And then partnerships is our ninth principle. So leveraging the power of robust partnerships who can accelerate actually taking your product or service into other places. And then we bring the keystone principle is positive growth culture. It holds the entire framework, circular framework together. And that's foundational, because you can have all of the other 9 principles in place, but actually if your culture doesn't support what you're trying to do and doesn't represent the values that you espouse, then
you'll bleed people.
Absolutely. So those are our 10 principles. So
I like it. Thank you. Sorry, audience, for making you hear it again, but I'm selfish in this as well. So ours, what I put together here is, from what I could tell, as you can probably tell from just talking to me, very, very structured mind, right? I'll take the most nebulous concept and turn it into a formula. Like I've done that with so many things that people could never think there would be a formula to. And so what I've put together here is, when it comes to the principles of performance, to be able to perform as an individual, as a family, or as a company, the fundamental principles are the same. And that's what I put together in these, saying that when you follow these things, you build performance in any endeavor, from individual to collective. The start for us is on what we use success for it. And it is redefining success into a framework that you can actually achieve. Most people say that success is setting a goal or objective and achieving it. Ultimately, that produces an environment where you can experience success. We believe that success is an optimized daily experience that's sustainable over time. And that becomes a doorway for actually producing the life that you want. For everyone listening, they're probably on the higher scale of performance, like higher end functioning people. We, as high functioning individuals, have been conditioned that success only comes through effort and struggle. And if you do that, you will produce effort and struggle in your striving of producing accomplishments. In that, you will live a life of struggle and effort, and with little interspersed blips of feeling good about it. And that produces not a successful life. So it's really a redefining of what success means. That leads into our success in life, no matter if you're an individual, a couple, a family, or a business, is 100% dependent on our ability to coordinate action with others. Everywhere in our life that we are experiencing success, we are coordinating action at a high level. Everywhere in our life that we are struggling, we are either isolating or we are in discord. So team becomes the second pillar. Based on team, how we coordinate action determines our success, of both our experience of success and the accomplishments we produce in it. Our teams are 100% dependent on our behavior. So what team you get to be on is dependent on your behavior. The performance of the team is dependent on group behavior, and our ability to influence and change behavior will result in low performance or high performance. So behavior is number 3. Each one of these builds, it's the foundational, let's call it lever, of the one before it. So if I want to produce success, I need to be on the right team and coordinate action well on that team. In order to get on the right team and coordinate action well, I have to have effective behavior. I have to be able to change my behavior to produce that performance. Our behavior is 100% dependent on our ability to self-regulate. So self-regulating mentally, physically, and emotionally produces my behavior. My behavior results on what teams I'm allowed on and my performance on those teams, and my ability to coordinate action produces success. So we can look at those 4 things as a foundation for a family, right? You have to be able to have an optimized daily experience sustainable over time in the family. We have to identify how we coordinate action as a family, roles, purpose, actions, behaviors. We have to identify what behaviors support the family we want and what behaviors we need to change. And we need to understand how to leverage our self-regulation individually and influencing the self-regulation of another to produce that behavior. Same thing as a business. Those 4 things, when you start working those 4 things, they're very individual. And once I start working those 4 things, I start gaining some movement. Now, the transition point is in the 5th pillar, which is leadership. So in leadership, I have established a strong foundation and performance in each one of those 4 pillars. And just in doing that, I start to inspire others around me to have better behavior or performance in each of those 4 pillars. And that's the essence of leadership, influencing change. So leadership with intent is where my job is to identify in an individual, where are they struggling in one of those first 4, and how can I influence an environment where they can increase their performance in one of those first 4. That's leadership. Once you start leading with individuals that are being optimized in those first 4, all of a sudden we gain a lot of momentum, and that's where planning comes in. So planning becomes the last principle. And this is where I got a lot of slack, like a lot of flack like you, of putting leadership and planning at the end. But every time that I brought planning or leadership in an organization where individual performance based on those first 4 were not solid, it was a waste of time and energy, or they gained speed in the wrong direction and crash and burn. And so we've turned it upside down as well.
I love those. And at the end, I know you've quite a number of resources to help people assess where they're at here. And so we reference those at the end, Larry. Before we move into our close, again, this is one that I'm always interested in, because we coach our leaders around getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. When you set a bold, ambitious vision for the future and move outside of the program peer group that we take CEOs through and begin to articulate that within your team and publicly, there's a huge amount of fear that comes with that. And we coach around resilience, and we provide tools and practices for our CEOs to embed within their daily lives. Given your background, self-regulation would have been incredibly important. I'd say the ability not to pull the trigger rather than pull the trigger is something I would imagine your training has teased out. What habits or practices would you encourage our leaders to start with? You know, I'm always saying to anyone who listens to the show, you've taken an hour of your time, you know, take something from it. What would you encourage them to do tomorrow to begin the process of building on self-regulation?
I think an understanding of how on a neuroscience level self-regulation works helps. So there are, and I'll do this quite quickly. We go quite deep on this, but I'll do it quite quickly. And I'm taking very complex neuroscience and simplifying it for you here. So it gets a little more complicated than this, but fundamentally this is how it works. There's two parts of the brain that control all self-regulation. That's a very interesting concept. So that means my mental and my emotional self-regulation are controlled by the same two parts of the brain. That has a couple consequences. One, all parts of the brain work about the same way. The density, how well the density of neural connections, how well those neural connections are insulated determine, let's call the skill or power we have in that part of our brain. So self-regulation is no different than, say, our cerebellum, which is our baseball part of the brain. I practice self-regulation, I practice quitting, or I practice perseverance, just like I practice hitting a baseball. The more neural connections that I produce in that part of my brain, the greater my capacity for self-regulation. So this is amazing, because say I work physical self-regulation on a daily basis, when I have a need for emotional self-regulation, I've got the power for it, even if I haven't trained it. That's a bonus. The downside is, since the same parts of the brain control all types of self-regulation, if I wear down my power, just like if I get tired hitting baseballs, eventually I run out of glucose in that part of the brain. I'm ineffective. Same thing with perseverance. If I wear it out down physically, I won't have power for emotional self-regulation. So the good is I get to build one and use another. The downside is if I wear down all my power in one, I don't have it for another. So that leads us to one concept, piggy bank. So think of self-regulation like a piggy bank. I have to worry about the size of my piggy bank and how much money's in it. So one thing that I need to do is continue to stretch my piggy bank, make it bigger so it can hold more money. Yeah. I do that by, when I have the power, the energy, the ability, stress my ability to self-regulate. That's why I do things like you're saying, how do I stay in shape? Well, I love doing things that I could die in, because it forces me to emotionally self-regulate, mentally self-regulate, and physically self-regulate. So every time I go and do a massive downhill mountain biking run, I'm stressing and stretching my piggy bank. I'm also spending the money in it. So when I get done with that, I'm not going to get on a podcast where I have to be mentally sharp, because I know my piggy bank's low. So the first part is find opportunities to stretch your piggy bank mentally, physically, and emotionally when on a regular basis. The second is protect your money. Don't waste your money. Don't spend your self-regulation dollars on things that aren't going to serve you. A perfect example is social media. So I look at no social media, no news, none, zero, nothing. The reason being is the news and social media are designed to have you feel not good about yourself. So that means that I'm using emotional self-regulation dollars every time I look at Facebook or watch the news. I'm wasting dollars that I could be spending on something that I actually need. So be careful of where you're wasting your dollars so that you're not, when you need your piggy bank to be full of dollars, and use that emotional self-regulation for that hard conversation, or use that mental self-regulation for that need to focus on that deep problem, or the physical self-regulation to work that extra hour to be able to get it done, you have the dollar bills in your piggy bank.
And for CEOs, typically, what do you recommend to ensure that they are protecting the dollars and filling up the piggy bank?
Mental, physical, emotional, right? So on the physical side, make sure you're getting rest, you're eating, you're taking some breaks. Because if I'm sitting in here and I have to go to the bathroom really bad for this whole podcast, I'm spending dollars physical, and when I need to have the conciseness of thought, I'm not going to have it. So take care of yourself physically. On the mental side, distractions, right? Every time that I distract myself, I have to use it. I spend a mental self-regulation dollar when I have to shift from tasks. So set up times for concentration and focus. Emotional. Don't waste your emotional dollars on things that don't matter, like news, social media, things of that nature. So those would be a couple of them. But just think about it from where in my life am I stressing my emotional, physical, and mental self-regulation? Do I need to? Can I save some dollar bills there?
Yeah, again, we're absolutely aligned on that. We recommend and encourage our CEOs not to be listening to the news, because ultimately it doesn't serve their vision. Right. It's the same negativity that has been trashed out for for whenever the news channels began, and it's serving their purpose, not the purpose of the CEOs. So absolutely aligned. I love the description. I, again, never heard it articulated like that. I really appreciate that, Larry. In closing, being respectful of your time, you've been wonderful. I've really, really enjoyed this podcast. Given the depth and richness of your life and your experiences, can you leave our listeners today with 3 timeless takeaways?
3 timeless takeaways. I'd say I'll go to kind of my deeply held values. One of them is around courage. So courage is not the absence of fear, it's taking action despite fear. That as a SEAL, I was probably the most terrified and had the most fear of anyone, yet I was able to take action in every moment that I needed to, despite the fear. That's true courage. Fear is a gift. Second one is around teams. My success in life, both my experience of that success and what I can produce, is 100% dependent on my ability to coordinate action with others, to team. The most important thing in my life, in any zone of my life, are the teams that I'm on. And the last piece of it is that success is an optimized daily experience that's sustainable over time. My life does not have to be hard to produce results. And that's something that I work on, struggle every day, because I'm a recovering struggleaholic of just, as a SEAL, I knew that the better I suffered, the better I was, right? Those that could suffer the best were the highest in that organization. And that's been a hard transition. And as entrepreneurs, we're conditioned in that same way, that struggle, pain, suffering is necessary for success. And I question that. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, those are going to resonate with so many of our listeners. Again, we're aligned. Our language is slightly different, but we are encouraging and coaching CEOs through our program and certainly through this podcast to purposefully scale with joy, flow, and ease.
Yeah.
That's the Holy Grail. Larry, you've been an incredible guest, so much wisdom in the show today. If people want to reach you, where best to reach you, Larry, and learn
So
more?
how leadership actually works, the book, we have the website is the same, howleadershipactuallyworks.com, probably the best place to go. SEAL Team Leaders is the name of the company, but going to the book website is probably the easiest to kind of to get a grasp of it. As you said, we have a assessment tool that we use in our organization and with our clients to identify where of those 6 pillars that you need to put your attention. So we offer that for free on there. On the other side, so I've never really been much on social media, but my girlfriend started a Instagram channel that is called Larry Does Cool Shit. So if you want to see me doing things that you could die doing, I've really been enjoying being able to put all the cool shit that I do in on my own time, flying and bikes and cars and all that stuff. So if you want to see that kind of stuff, head over there and check out that site.
Brilliant. Well, look, beyond the cool shit, what's next for you then?
Our business is transitioning. So we went from product based, selling individual classes, workshop, coaching programs to service based, where we put our consultants inside the organizations to be responsible for all coordination of action in a company. And we're transitioning now to doing management. So we're partnering with different companies where they actually bring us in to have positional authority to actually to run different parts of it. So we have a interesting partnership with a public equity or a private equity firm where we'll be running 10 companies for them. And it's going to be neat for us to be able to actually have the ability to make decisions versus just trying to push them in the right direction. So I'm really excited about that.
That's brilliant. Well, look, I wish you all the very best with that. I wish you every success with your wonderful book, How Leadership Actually Works, a Navy SEAL's Complete System for Coordinating Teams. We'll put a link to the assessment in the show notes and anything else that you would want to signpost our listeners to. Larry, I have to thank you again for sharing your incredible wisdom and bringing such wonderful energy to the show today. Take care.
My pleasure. And I want to take you up on those Guinnesses at some point.
Absolutely, there's an open invite. So look, the next time you're across this web, please, it would be an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you.